マイケル・フェザーさんがトゥットゥルットゥットゥ言ってます。
Yeah.
Recording in
Why?
progress.
Why? There we go. Good deal. Okay. Everybody can hear me okay? All right, good deal. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and I guess we can kind of start. So, okay, here we are live. All right. So yeah, great to be here in Tokyo and talk with you all about various different things. I haven't really gone to a DevOps conference in a long time, but it's going to be a fun thing here, right? So keynote today, this is the title that I have: DevOps, Development Cadence, and the Product Lifecycle. And what this is about really is trying to go and understand a little bit more about the way that we organize ourselves in software development and understand where DevOps fits with this and where there's certain opportunities to basically sort of restore some of the things that we kind of had in the early days of Agile. So I'll basically talk a little bit about some of the history of Agile, but then also a little bit about where we stand with DevOps today and some of the things that are a little bit more possible now because of the way that we've sort of advanced within the industry. So to kind of start out a bit, I just want to go and sort of like just mention, the prehistory, really. It's like the Accelerate book came out a while back. Door metrics have pretty much taken over the world in terms of DevOps, right? And, this is the way that we tend to go and sort of like look at things now. The door metrics have had like a bit of a long lineage. And it seemed like it was really the first foray into going and really pressing automation in the context of software development to handle kind of like the last mile of software development, the last piece of it. So much of this has really been about how do we actually go ahead and build a decent pipeline so that when we say that we have code that works, we can just press a button, it goes through the entire process and gets put into production as quickly as possible. So we have these obvious things. We have deployment frequency, lead time for changes, how long does it take for the commit to get across, and also change failure rate. Can we do this without introducing errors, and also how quickly can we solve problems once we actually discover them. So we have all of this, and it's nice, but there's really a theory behind it. And the theory is that if we're able to do all these things, if we're able to handle the last mile of software development, then we basically have put ourselves into a space where we're able to go and produce value and be able to produce it deterministically in the context of software development. We've handled that last piece to free ourselves up from any other problems. So with this, it's important to understand where we were prior to DevOps. We were in this situation where quite often you would, as a developer, work on something and then you have to hand things off into another team, and they would basically do the final things necessary to go and push things into production. And these handoffs were things that would take a period of time, kind of slowing down the process. But we kind of understand now that if we basically have good door metrics, we're in a good position to be able to go and actually deterministically deliver software. And that's really what the goal tends to be for us. So let's go back a little bit prior to DevOps and talk a little bit about where we started from. And I promise you that this is like, it's like a little bit of prehistory in a way, but it's also kind of like important for where I'm going to be going with this talk. So in the 1990s, prior to Agile software development, we were really in a bad situation with software development where there was no real determinism. Developers would often tell you how long it would take to do something and be wrong, right? And then quite often you would have things that wouldn't ever get delivered. And delivery was something that happened very infrequently and with no real period. There was no real period of delivery. But what we were able to do, borrowing some ideas from Toyota production system, is to basically go and concentrate on going and minimizing the handoffs involved in software development. And when we do this, we maximize flow. And we handled this by going and saying, we want every team to be as autonomous as possible. We want teams to be cross-functional, that they have all the skills that are necessary for the development of that product so that it can be done without interaction with other parts of the organization. And these were kind of core ideas of Agile. Agile talked about many other things, but I believe it was to facilitate this kind of thing. One of the things I often think about is, like, if you have a team, what would it be like for that team to be its own separate company in a way? If you can work with that kind of autonomy, you can move very fast. And so it's kind of nice to be able to do this. When we scale things up, we get into a situation where we have multiple handoffs. I do something and somebody else has to do something with it. And then we move forward and do things. And these handoffs tend to slow down process. So with early Agile, there were various interesting things that happened. First thing was the history of this. There are many different schools of Agile, but the one I'll concentrate on was the team that developed extreme programming. This was back at a company called Chrysler in the US, and the team was about 6 people. And they had an on-site customer, a single person they would talk to about the things that they were doing. And they could find out the answer to any question very quickly. And it's interesting because the thing is that the system they were building was an internal payroll system. And it's relatively small. It wasn't like part of a giant other system. It was a system that basically these 6 people could work on by themselves without having to have many extra communication points with the rest of the organization. So the interesting thing is that when people first heard about Agile, they were delighted in the context of the industry. And the reason why is because they felt very strongly this solved all problems of software development. And everybody was like very, very excited. But the thing about this is it wasn't really true. With Agile software development, it seemed to solve the problem of how do you deliver as a small team, but it doesn't deal with the big issue. How do you basically make your delivery better when you have many teams that have to work together because your product is very big? So the reason why we wanted small teams is because of one major problem, and it is communication cost. So there's something called Brooks' Law, which basically was written many years ago. And it was the observation that when you have a team that is late in delivery, if you add more people to the project, hoping it goes faster, what happens is basically the project becomes even later than this. And the observation was that whenever you have, say, n people on a team, the number of communication paths is n squared. And this is just an obvious truism of software development. So we've settled on the idea that teams should be small, about 6 people, maybe even as few as 3 people, for instance. And the interesting thing then is that that goes and forces a constraint on software development. We want to have small teams, but the products that we want to build tend to grow and grow and grow. So Kent Beck, who was the founder of extreme programming, one of the early Agile software development processes, I heard him say once, somebody asked him the question, how can you make Agile work with more than 6 people? And he just sort of said, just give me all the teams of 6 people and I'll let somebody else solve that problem of dealing with the bigger projects than this. And it was a joke in a way, but it was also going and recognizing that there is something nice about having small things to work on. And that's kind of like an important aspect of what Agile was in the beginning. So the thing is that we get into this problem as we go and we scale things up. So when we want to scale things up, what we do is we basically try to adjust the modularity of the system, break it into pieces such that each piece is a domain, and then you have a single team working on it. And, there is the tension that as these domains grow, then we need more teams in that domain. And that goes and causes more communication costs between the teams. And then you have some more bureaucracy, more things you have to go and coordinate, and it can slow things down to some degree. So it's not much of a surprise that the place where Agile developed a lot of traction in the beginning, a lot of, it really took hold in startup community. For startups, it's very simple because you usually have just one product you're working on, and you have lots of feedback with the market that you try something out, see if it works, and if it doesn't, you try something else out. You can move very quickly through this process because you're concentrating on a single customer or a single vision that basically you can try out over and over again. But there are many large products that don't really have this situation. So yes, the ideal case for early Agile was that thing of having a small, simple product to work on. But we get into this thing where as products grow, things tend to slow down because of communication cost. And it's not just the size of the product, and it's not just the number of teams. There is another dimension too. Okay, there is ambiguity when you have more than one customer. And this is usually when you start to have product management in a company. And when there's more than one need to satisfy in a market. So this is the issue of having a product that becomes mature over time. As it becomes mature, trying to decide what to do and when to do it becomes a bigger issue quite often, just naturally, as the way that software grows. So there is this thing, as products grow, the feedback cycle with the market tends to slow down to some degree. We have to do a lot of coordination and planning. What is the impact of this feature, not just on the current customer, but on many other customers we have already? And a side effect of this is that sometimes development will be it will pause a little bit while people are trying to figure things out. And people look at this as being an inefficiency in a way, but I think it might have some advantages, and we will talk about them later. The danger that many organizations get into is the feeling that they want to have the development teams working hard all the time. If they are not writing code and pushing it out every single day, then they are not providing as much value as they could. Has anybody seen this yes, this happens in many cases. And I think sometimes this happens because product and development start to split a bit. And product basically has the job of keeping the inputs to development full and always keeping them active. And this becomes a problem over time, and we'll discuss why later. But there is an alternative. The alternative is when the small teams themselves do not just the typical development work of writing code and testing, but also basically make the product decisions themselves. And this is almost like the startup model in a way. So if the team owns the planning and the decision-making, as well as putting everything into production, then development becomes episodic. And what I mean by episodic is it's almost like you have a period of intense work putting things in the market, and then time for reflection and time for checking things out with people and coordinating. And then you have another burst of activity, which is like another episode to go and basically just, push features out once you have this direction. And so you can see this as like high activity with like putting things in the market, lower activity putting things in the market, but high activity in understanding more about what you need to do and what direction to go and take. And does this sound good or bad? It's funny because if your goal is to treat development like a machine, it sounds bad. But in terms of what is natural for human beings, I think it is kind of good. Think about your day. You sleep at night, you work during the day. You have some work, maybe you have some hobbies as well as your work. And in your hobbies, you still have intensity, just like you do in your work, but it's intensity in a different direction. And that variety is something which is very valuable for us. It prevents burnout, which is good. So this is the interesting thing for us. If we recognize this, that pushing the product design and everything else as far possible down into the teams is a valuable thing. If we do this, we're going to have people who are doing not just the development, but also many other coordination tasks and things. And the code delivery is going to rise and fall periodically in that team. Then what does this mean for our DORA metrics? I think what it means is that the concentration is no longer on keeping the DORA metrics steady through all time. It is no longer about having a deployment frequency that is always high. It is more about how do you stop that intensity level and do some things and then start it up and basically have the same quality level once you start things up again. Our new metric becomes how quickly can we start from nothing, start from zero, and move right back into a development mode, and then stop that and pause to basically regroup our thoughts and start it again. If we can basically stop and start and still maintain the ability to go and do high deployment frequency, high fixing errors like time to recover, and all these different things, we are in a better state. Think a bit about athletes. If you are a person who is doing like a sprint, if you're like a fast track runner, it doesn't mean that you're running forever at the same rate. It means that you have a time before the race, you're able to start the race and do those things, and then you take the break between. Training is the same way for athletes. You can't have constant activity. You must have activity and then times of rest, activity and then times of rest. And the rest is not doing nothing. The resting is basically doing the other work that's necessary to pay back technical debt or explore new directions or figure things out, talk closer to the market and the customer and do things. So it's interesting then. This thing is what happens when we, as we grow products and as we grow organizations, we move away from the very quick feedback cycle with the market to a place where we have to be a little bit more strategic. And usually this is because of the coordination costs that happen, where it's because you have more coordination, you have to also figure out, are we placed in the market correctly? Because making a change involves much coordination across the organization. So you have to go and figure out what your direction is. You need to be able to reset direction when you need to. You need to be strategic about what other additional markets you move into, things like this. These things will slow you down a bit, and that's okay. It is the price of scale, the price of growing an organization and a product over time as it becomes more mature. So we want to be able to have this thing. We want to be able to concentrate on development. We want to have few handoffs. So the people who are doing the development work are also doing this other work of coordinating and doing these things. And like I said, we want to be able to start very quick development activity, stop it, start it again, and all these things, and maintain the health to be able to have this kind of change of cadence, the way that we do our work. So the metric becomes, how quickly can we go from doing no delivery to a cadence where frequency is high, lead time is low, we're able to deliver without errors and fix errors quickly. If we can start from nothing and basically get back into the rhythm of doing that, then we know that we have the skill to do it when we need it. And we become teams that are able to just solve problems and move quickly without necessarily having to be working all the time in that furious activity to be able to go and get to that level of high performance. So yeah, this is the interesting thing. Early Agile was about, in many ways, doing sustainable development. It was about making sure that basically the people who were developing software were not going to burn out over time. And it's something that tends to work in small organizations, small scale at times. But the thing is that we get into this trap, as I mentioned earlier. And it's this thing of going and basically treating the development teams like a machine. it just doesn't tend to work very well. But it is something that we tend to fall back into just because we feel that the utilization of writing code and getting it into production is something we don't want to waste. But everyone who is a developer is able to do this other work too, I think, right? And if you have this, then you can basically go ahead and have these people sort of work with this cadence of development. And so there are times when there is more coding activity, times when there is less, but there are always things to do, okay? So it's rough when you have a very serious backlog of stories. You can do this, but that's usually a side effect of people trying to keep developers busy. And that's not the goal. The goal is produce value, right? So I want to talk about something else. Kent Beck, whom I mentioned earlier, came up with this years ago, and it was this interesting frame for understanding what happens in products. And he basically called it the 3X model. He called it explore, expand, extract. And the idea behind this was that for any product that's being developed, it goes through these 3 stages. You have this thing where in the very beginning, you're exploring the market, the thing that you need to do. You're trying out small experiments, and then you finally seize upon something that's working and producing value for your customers, for the market. And when you do this, you basically are orienting yourselves in a particular direction. And the next thing is to figure out how to scale up, because most of the time, a product that only serves 10 people is not worthwhile in a sense, right? You're often trying to go and get a much bigger market, satisfy problems for many different people, thousands, maybe even millions of users. So you go into this phase where everything is about going and growing into that market, but also increasing the scale of what you do, which requires a great deal of technical insight and thinking and planning and things which are more than just how do I write code to solve this feature. It's also about going and doing all the other work to go and grow the entire organization around the product and the technical infrastructure to make things work. So that's expand. And then in the next place, in extract, it's kind of like once you have this market and you're serving them well, you get into this situation where you can't really, you can produce value by adding more features, but the main thing is to sort of make sure that you're not really losing customers and you're not supplying less value than they expect. And this is called the extract phase. This is the time when basically you have a mature product and maybe you could add more and more features, but we know that the more features you add, the more complication you incur. There's a thing where you can add more features to a product and it should be a different product instead of the product you're working on. Has anybody ever seen systems where it does too many things? It's not good for anybody, but people do this because what they're trying to do is trying to go and enhance the value of something they have rather than make a new thing. So this is a trap that can happen in many organizations. So the thing is to recognize that like any living thing, a product basically reaches maturity, and then it is not the time to go and explore as many new things. It's the time to go and basically do its job well. And it does its job well for a period of time, and maybe at some point it goes away and there's other products that basically take its place in some sense. But this is a very natural cycle for things. So here's the ramifications. Here are the things which happen as a result of looking at products this way. In Explore, we have quick cycles, and the speed at which we're doing things is determined by how quickly we can get feedback from the customers. And the backlogs don't seem to exist very much. You're constantly doing the new work to go and sort of do the things that are necessary in order to go and produce value immediately. Maybe you have backlogs because you can anticipate work that you will need 2 weeks from now, for instance, or 2 months. But that's always something you can change. And this is the natural, agile thing we try to do. In Expand, you might have bigger backlogs for 2 reasons. One is because you're building out more technical infrastructure and trying to do the scaling thing. And the other thing is because now you are making some bets, some gambles, some investment in the future in a particular direction. And some of these things will be to produce value that is not immediate, but only comes after a period of months, for instance. And so then you get into the thing of doing all the work to decide what those bets are and consolidating them, and then basically going in, putting things in the backlog to say, we will deal with these things in 2 months because we can't deal with them right now. You've set a direction for the product. Now, the thing is, when you do this, then you're in this place where you are building the backlog for the teams, and when they always are feeling behind because there's always things in the backlog. And this is the time when burnout can happen severely. The third stage, extract, is a bit different because quite often there's less urgency. There's less need to, I must have this fixed tomorrow. For fixes, yes, you need fixes very quick, but new features, maybe not as much. You don't have new features all the time. It's about keeping the current customers happy with things and doing things. So there's more caution when you do things, and burnout becomes a little bit less of a problem. So how do we actually approach this in the context of what we're doing? Well, it's interesting to go and notice that the expand stage is a place where things can kind of become more of a grind, where people are constantly acting like a machine to do things. Explore is good, but there's a lot of novelty in like the type of work that you're doing. So it's not like becoming burned out by doing the same thing every day. Extract, you can possibly have a bit of burnout, but because there's less urgency, it's possible to go and actually sort of like vary the work between the things that are needed to carry the system forward a bit, and also the things which are necessary to go and sort of keep it alive, usually more refactoring work, technical debt reduction, and things like this. This novelty is the important thing for us as humans when we're doing our work. Otherwise, we have burnout, and I'm sure if you have not experienced burnout yourself, you've probably been around people who have, and it's not a great thing for the people. It hurts the organizations and it hurts the products too. So I want to kind of like conclude here, and then we can move to some questions and things. But I think the important thing that I wanted to express here is that it seems like it should be a goal for us to go and actually make development more episodic in a way, that we are able to have a variety of things that we're doing, and that we're able to go and utilize people's skills in different areas for things. And, you know, we can do this by many different avenues. We can have many ways of doing this. But the interesting thing about this is that this goes and creates a more rested and durable workforce for the work that we do. And it tends to be healthier for products over time. And what this really kind of leads to is the notion that as much as possible, if the teams can be independent because the architecture is set up for decoupled work, then we're in a very good situation with things. And this requires a bit of work to be able to go and do this. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that the key skill moving forward with this is to learn how to start and stop quickly, and how to restart what we do, the pipelines, and be able to do these things, deployment frequency high, quick, fixing of errors, to be able to go and do this without going and maintaining it at a consistently high level. And when we do this, we should basically have a situation where things are much nicer. I think the interesting thing with this is just to recognize that we are human beings, and that basically these cadences we have every place else in life. We have the seasons for the year. We have our day and night cycle. We have all these different things. We are not machines, right? We can treat ourselves like machines, but it doesn't do ourselves good. I don't think it even does our products good. Our products have life cycles too. And if we align ourselves with these cycles, then we can have a more realistic way of working that allows us to go and move forward in good ways. And so these were the things I wanted to discuss with you today. And I guess if we open it up for questions and things, it'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a great talk. And so from here, it's Q&A time. So if you have some questions in this room, just raise your hand and I'll make my way over to ask them. But we also have Discord questions. And then I think questions from the other room, the Japanese translation room. So we'll wait a moment for them to come in. But I guess I'll start with one question myself. So you talk a lot about cadence and how it's important to increase the cadence and go faster. What's the right cadence? Like, I've heard 2 weeks, I've heard a week. Some people say every day change production. What's the right number for that?
What is the right number of times to eat a meal in a day? Is it 3 or is it 2? Does it depend upon the person? All these different things, right? What I think is good is for us to go and at least understand when we are doing the work, it's kind of like, how do we balance the work with the other things that we need to go and do, right? And as I mentioned, as products become more complex, there's necessarily more thinking work that's involved in changing the systems. This thinking work can be done by one team and told to another team, but it could also be done by one team that actually does that thinking work and also does the work of changing the systems. And you should be able to move seamlessly between this thinking work, which might involve doing no coding for maybe a couple of days, and going right back into the coding and doing the things that you need to do. It is a mistake to go and look at that thinking work as something that is a waste of time. The thing that is a real waste of time is the handoff between people who are thinking over here and the people who are doing over there. That is a terrible line that we really don't want to go and have. So I think it's much like the same thing that happens. You know, if you are a runner and you spend a lot of time running, at a certain point you're going to get tired, and you must respect that you are tired, right? We don't have to sort of decide whether we are tired of developing as much as decide what is needed at any point of time, and recognize that our feelings about being tired are one piece of information. Also, the type of work that needs to be done is something that should vary over time. And as it varies, we should basically allow ourselves adequate changes in what we do in order to go in and basically do our work in a sense of variety of time period and variety of work. So, yeah. Does that kind of answer in a way?
Yeah, I think that's a good, pretty good perspective. Like, there's no right answer, in other words, and it's just like, I don't know, you have to figure it out for your own team, more or less.
Yeah.
I was just checking on the Discord, and there's also some questions there, but go ahead. I think it's okay.
ディスコード上から質問をいただきました。チームが自己完結している状態というのはどういう状態？
I think to me, I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the talk, that to me, I always ask myself when dealing with a team, what if that one team was its own company? Okay, would they be able to do everything by themselves? And most of the time, the answer to that question is that would be ridiculous. It would not be necessary. It would not be possible, because that team is working on a piece of a big thing rather than working as something that's self-contained. But I think that from a human level, having a small team that has its own directed work that can work independently of everybody else is a very useful thing. You can move very fast when you do things. So I think this is the thing to go and think about with this. There are reasons why we can't always do this, because as products grow, we need more teams, and they need to coordinate. But we should always be asking ourselves, how can we make the work as independent as possible? This very much is part of what in team topologies, which maybe you have heard of, there's the notion of a stream-aligned team, which is basically a team that has this high level of autonomy. And it depends upon platform teams and enabling teams in order to go and do its work. To me, the ideal world is every team is stream-aligned, but there are reasons we can't do this. So we have to go and sort of say, how can we move things in that direction to go and basically make things a bit nicer when we can.
Last year, we had a interview with Matthew Skelton about team topologies, and it was a great, a great conversation where I think a lot of us learned about it for the first time. So it was a great topic. Let's see. Do we have any other Discord? Okay. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions coming through. So, okay.
質問です。ゆっくりする部分がなぜチームにとって必要か、燃え尽きるリスクになぜ対応しなければいけないのかを、将来燃え尽きてもいいから、今、開発者に毎日コードを書いてほしいステークホルダーにどのように説明すればいいのか、いいアイデアはありませんか？
Can I ask for a paraphrase because of the, yeah.
いや通訳からちょっと難しかった。わかりづらい。なんか、we'll switch questions. Okay, here's a question. So, how should we, to apply DevOps and Agile effectively in a legacy enterprise company? There are many of these legacy enterprise companies in Japan. How do you apply it effectively when they already have a lot of existing processes and are thinking in an old style?
Yeah, why is this question coming to me? A legacy question? So, just kidding. Okay.
Yeah, actually, yeah, and I should note, we were a little rushed from that, but we forgot to do the introduction to Michael Feathers, but I think everyone knows already, of course, but, Michael Feathers is very well known for the book Legacy Code as well. So that's why, of course, a joke. yeah, just to explain, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's this may be what's happening in Japan, but it's all around the world. The thing that's interesting is that software systems live far longer than the teams that produce them. And so we will always have older code and older systems that people don't understand as well as they could. So the interesting thing with this is to almost imagine your system as being like this, this terrain in a way, where you have many things. Some things are well understood, other things are not. And what you do is you start looking for the areas that are strategic, the areas that have high value, and maybe the areas that are not understood well enough for the strategy and the direction you need to go. And then you basically make plans to make those systems better, or those pieces better, or to renew them, all these different things. So in a way, it's kind of like the startup situation, where the startup is working from existing systems rather than basically having just the blank space where you just put new code, right? So there's friction there. You have to learn the system well enough to add features quickly. But the thing is that the way you work as a team style tends to be the same. You want to have small teams that are tasked with understanding something well enough to modify it, to add features, or to refactor and repurpose for different things. So it's just important to recognize it as part of the same problem in a way. So it's funny. It's almost like you have basically your organization and the market, right? In the legacy situation, it's your organization, the market, but part of the terrain of the things that you need to go and deal with is also the existing system. And that just becomes part of the problem in a way. But it's also something that basically becomes something you develop knowledge in, and then it becomes just like understanding your customer better. Understanding your code better is like understanding your customer better. So.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll ask another question from the chat room here. So, generally speaking, a member in a Japanese company, a member can be involved in a number of different projects at once. So having, considering, it's hard to consider the human aspect that you had talked about and mentioned when if you're involved with multiple projects instead of a single project. So when you have multiple projects and you're involved in many things, how do you apply the advice to that and solve the organizational problem?
It's a very tough question. And I think the main thing with this is to ask how necessary it is to have people working on several different projects. And it might be because there are people who basically have certain domain experience that is useful in those different projects. And so that's a very common situation. But what you want to do is cross-train in ways where basically you don't have this thing where people have to be spread too thin in the organization. So much of it is really having people work together to cross-train each other in the different areas that they're working in. I didn't mention this term, but the term cognitive load is extremely important. And everything that we do in software development to push things down to the team level in order to gain efficiencies and advantage also comes with increased cognitive load in many cases. And to handle this, we have to ruthlessly reduce the amount that any particular team needs to know about the things outside of the team. And that's just like an ongoing battle that you have within software development. The ongoing battle is the trade-off between a team that needs to know everything and basically is able to go and provide very effective value in that place, and one which is able to move faster because it only has to care about the things that are local to it. And so you have to move that slider when you're going and organizing your design, organizing your organization as well. So this is something that impacts teams and architecture and also product feature set. So all these things come together in this cohesive socio-technical view of the system you're working on. So.
Thank you. We will try to get a question from the other room now, because there's some people raising their hands in there. So
す
hopefully.
いません。アレックさん聞こえますか？画面共有を止めていただくと。画面共有止めていただいてもいいですか？
Yes.
聞こえてますでしょうか？
Yeah.
はい。
聞こえてますよ。
はい。発表ありがとうございました。緩急をつけて、働くというので、非常に大事なことで、僕らもやっぱりそういう時が一番生産性高まるかなと思ってます。で、先ほどの3つの、X ですね。そこの真ん中の段階、エクスパンドの段階って、非常に多くのタスクが積まれて、どうしても緩急がつけづらい、時期だと思うんですけど、そういう時にでもやはり、意識して緩急をつけるためのなんかアイデアみたいなものがありましたら、シェアしていただけるとありがたいです。
Yeah, I guess the main thing I can say is pretty much like the answer that I gave in the last question a little bit, that so much of this is understanding what has to be local decision making and what requires knowledge of the external context, and being able to go and maybe minimize the people that need to be aware of both of those things, right? When you do this, you're going to have a disparity of knowledge between the people who have broader context and the ones that have local context, and this is unavoidable. But it's sometimes the lever that you need to go and use in order to go and basically move quickly in the expand stage, right? I think the other thing as well is just basically paying attention. If people start to look like they're burned out, that's not sustainable over time. So you have to figure out how you're best going to go and maybe perhaps bring people into the team or repurpose the work that they're doing in order to basically allow things to move forward in a good way. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of trade-offs involved in this sort of thing. But we all know what the answer is when basically people burn out. It's just no good. It's not good for the people. It's also bad in terms of continuity of knowledge in the organization and the sustainability of development. So it's not like there's one particular lever you can use to go and solve this problem, but you do have to basically just, if you are able to transparently see when burnout is occurring and then act upon it by going in sort of maybe bringing people in or moving people around, things along those lines. There are many different solutions to this kind of thing, but you need to be aware of it when it happens. I think that's the main thing to take away.
I think that answered. We didn't hear from them.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
本当に大事です。
That was okay. So in here, I thought I saw. Okay.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you. You said
はい。
大丈夫ですか？
今、オンラインからちょっと質問したいですけど。いいですか？どうぞ。Go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. You said episodic is the key, and it's important, you say. But I don't still understand what is the episodic or not. And my question is, what kind of things, or how can we say it is episodic or not? Or do you know any articles or books?
There's nothing that's really written. I've wanted to write about this for a while, but I haven't. But I think the interesting thing for this, from my perspective, is that I'm not sure that it's a problem for everybody. I think there are some people who are very happy to basically work feature, and basically work at the same pace forever, and they're okay with it. I also know that many of the people who leave software development, quite often, they look for the ability to like win in a certain circumstance. The ability to go and basically say, I am done with this, and it's time to move on to the next thing, where the pieces are a little bit bigger than this. Let's imagine something. In most software organizations, you have people who do sales. They sell to the customer. And what they have then is they have this constant variety where they're trying to sell things to a particular customer. And then there's a success point, and everybody can go, yay, why, right? Everybody can go, yay, we've succeeded. In development, we can have a lot of those yays, but they don't really tend to be tied to customer value directly in the big chunks. So the episodes are about going and doing something constructive that is useful for the market and the customer, which feels like it is a separate piece by itself that you can look back on and say, wow, look, we did this. This was major. And this happens in startup development quite often, but it can happen in other places too, when we basically do a giant refactoring, for instance, and we finish that kind of thing. So it's this thing of having variety in the work and having a cadence where it's not furious activity all the time. Instead, it's activity that goes in waves, this kind of thing. And I could be overstating this because maybe it seems like there are some developers that don't mind, just, the same thing that goes all the way across. To me, it always felt a little bit unnatural. And I do feel that there is something about our growth, which makes it kind of nice to be able to have this wave-like structure of what we do. It feels to me like more human in a way. So does that help explain?
Maybe I need more discussion about that.
Sure, we can discuss later.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay.
Thank you very much. We have a question in the other room in Japanese. So we'll let them cue
ありがとう
that
ございま
real
す。部門
quick.
B から質問です。
はい。お話ありがとうございます。ちょっとお話の趣旨ともしかしたら違っちゃうかもしれないですけど、ちょっとお聞きしたいことがあります。チームが、拡大していって、多分その成熟期に入ってくる時で、またそのプロダクトもその大きくなって、多分エクストラクトというか、なんか抽出の時期になっている時に、なんかどうしてもなんていうかやっぱそのチーム間の、コラボレートが必要になってくるってことがすごく最近感じてまして、で、先ほどおっしゃってたお話では、なんていうか、プロダクトを、切ることで、なんか、なるべく小さいチームで関与するのをなるべく最小限にするみたいな話もあったと思うんですけど、とはいえそのプロダクトを切ることができなくて、どうしてもそのチーム間でコラボレートが必要になる、大きなコミュニケーションが必要になってしまうことで、いろいろなんか遅延してしまうことがあって、なんかすごく悩んでしまうことがあるんですね。で、なので、お聞きしたいのが、その、大きなプロダクトで、 成熟したチームで、大きな人数で、チーム間がどうやってうまくコラボレートしていけるかっていうことのなんかこう、アイディアというか、なんか意見を聞いてみたいなと思って質問させていただきました。
Well, there's one thing that people don't consider all that often, and there's something called dynamic reteaming, which is rather than going and saying that we have a team that basically stays together for 2-3 years and we hope nobody leaves and stuff like this. What you start to do is you form like this bigger community where maybe you have like, 25, 30, 40 people that basically all know each other pretty well, but they have teams that live for only a relatively short period of time. And then they basically go and people will join from one team to another. People will rotate among the teams. And it's all about maintaining this common vision of the way that people work, the way that the rest of the organization works, and having the working relationship with the people that are around. This can be very healthy for an organization. But we often get ourselves into the state where we feel like, here's the team, and it basically doesn't need to know very much about anything else. We can learn different areas of the system. And it's important for people to do this within the context of an organization. So I think communication is one of those things where people can talk through Slack or Microsoft Teams. You can have meetings and stuff like that to discuss things. But the real learning happens when you are doing the work. And if you are able to work in something you're not familiar with to gain some understanding, that's great. And if we're able to go and dynamically create new teams and disperse them in order to go and sort of like strategically do things within a portion of an organization, then we have the ability to go and sort of like keep the amount of knowledge growing within the system. And people aren't overloaded with everything. They're able to concentrate for a period of 3 or 4 months on something, and that's good. And then when they're able to shift out of that and start working in other areas of the system, they change context and they're able to do these things. We can be far more dynamic about the things that we do. And that's great. We can change teams much easier than code can be changed sometimes. And so we can take that as a lever that we can use.
Oh, great. Thank you. From here, we'll we'll listen to a couple of questions from Discord. So I think,
すいません。ちょっと私の方で質問してもいいでしょうか。聞こえますかね。河内です。別室におります。質問があります。今日お話しいただいた一つの会社のような形で、チームが、運営された方がいいという話が、アジャイルの時代ありましたという話、ご説明いただきました。で、やっぱり私たちエンジニアというのはなかなかお金の話、マネーの話とか、あと政治の話、疎いところがあって、できればそういう話したくないなと思って、で一つの会社としてやっていくためには、でもお金の話と政治の話、絶対やらなきゃいけないですよね。で、アジャイルだと、例えば、さっきの脱予算系、ビヨンドバジェッティングとか、様々ことを学んでいく必要があるとは思うんですけど、やっぱりね、例えば日本だとマネージャーになりたくないとか、いや、私は開発者なんで、開発企業なんで、プロダクトオーナーさん、ビジネスの方、全部持ってきてくださいと、要件をね。そんなふうに思っちゃう人も多いと思うんですけど、この部屋にいる方は、私はそれを超えていかないといけない。DevOpsDaysをやってるのは、皆さんがエンジニアにとどまっちゃダメと思ってるんですけど、マイケルさん、いかがに思ってますでしょうか。マイケルさんも多分もともとエンジニアだと思うんですけど、そういうあたりをどう考えてきたのかっていうのを教えていただければと思います。
Well, yes, but I think it's an interesting thing about this. I think there's this old saying, I forget, some science fiction author said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed in a way, right? And that's an important frame to have, is that people have different wants and desires from their work situation. And sometimes the people who basically want to do more and grow in more areas end up at different organizations than other people do, or maybe a different part of the company. We all have our own temperament and desires about how we work. One of the first Agile conferences I went to long time ago, I was so excited when I was going back to my company to teach some things I'd learned, but I also realized this is something that has to work for people who basically don't want to make their work the focus of their entire life, that just basically do it as a job. And it has to be good for them also, because we all have that different point of view. The thing I will say, though, is that in some strategic areas for almost every company, there are areas where the handoffs basically sort of hurt you, right? The thing where I understand, say, finance way better than somebody else, we have to bridge that communication gap all the time. I worked for a stock trading company once that basically brought in people to go and teach trading fundamentals to their developers because it would ease the communication between the business and the people developing the system, getting that kind of deep domain knowledge. So it really depends on what path you're on. Some people are on the path of, I want to become the best JavaScript developer in the world. And others are kind of like, I want to grow in my problem-solving ability. And problem-solving is something you can exercise in so many different domains that touch on software development. So if you're in that path, then basically there are opportunities for this, to be able to go and sort of like grow to the point where the teams can be a little bit more self-contained and sort of maximize value in that way. So I'm not saying everybody has to do this, but there are places where this can be very beneficial for organizations. And so we should look for those places and find the people who want to work in that type of environment where they're constantly working and acquiring new skills, and utilize them as best as possible for them to grow and for the organizations to grow. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
ありがとうございます。明日ぜひOST がありますので、そこでそういった話もみんなで議論できればと思っています。ありがとうございます。じゃあ次の方どうぞ。
And I think we have time for another question, and it is online.
はい、開発にリズムがある場合には、どのようにフォーキーズを測り、どのように良し悪しを判断するといいでしょうか。
How do you judge whether it's good or bad? It is, like most things, it is multi-dimensional. You have to think about the health of the team. You have to think about whether the right work is being done. And you have to basically think about the stage that the product is in. And you're constantly balancing these forces in order to go and basically do the best that you can. And this is not a mystery in a way. There are many things that we have to balance in life. And so it's important to understand where we are in these different areas and sort of anticipate when we might be going into a problematic area in terms of maybe pushing people too hard, or maybe going and, doing things inappropriate for the product stage that we happen to be in. So it's not like I said, it's not like there's one particular thing to do. I think just having the awareness of these things is the good thing. And then you get to do the rich problem solving to figure out what you need to do when you discover that you're in a problematic situation based upon the health of the team, health of the organization, and the speed of development. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll try another one from online.
Sure.
オンライン側の質問です。集中する部分とゆっくりする部分が必要ということでしたが、切り替えるタイミングはどのように決定すべきでしょうか。ゆっくりするタイミングを見つけることができず、疲れてしまうことが多いです。
At a certain point, it's decided for you. It's basically you can't work that hard anymore, right? And that's just what happens. It's a matter then of us being realistic and understanding when we are actually starting to lose our capacity to be creative and do the problems, solve the problems well. And that's just a rough thing. And I think it's something that we have to basically deal with. And it's like, these things all get solved, but they may not get solved in good ways, right? So the important thing for us is to be aware of when things are going a bit bad and trying to go and sort of figure things out. I think the key lever with this is the thing I mentioned a bit earlier, which is basically if you basically make more product decisions happen at the lower level, a cadence will kind of happen naturally with this, right? It's not practicable in every domain, right, in every business, but to the degree that you're able to make small teams, they're very reactive, they're learning what they need to do, then there's going to be a natural cadence to things that happens with that. When you have a separate product organization that is creating a lot of work and putting in a backlog for the teams to work on, then that kind of breaks down. And when you think about it, actually in that situation, all the work that goes into a backlog is a bit like a guess. It's a guess at what will be needed maybe 3-4 months from now. And this was part of the original thing with Agile, is to recognize that the guesses that we make may not be very good. We have to basically be able to go and sort of figure out what the most appropriate thing is for value today when we're doing things. It may be value that contributes to something further in the future for the product. It can be immediate value also. And we need to understand what that balance is. So, yeah.
Great. That a great answer. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So we want to do 2 more.
Sounds
So
good.
yes. Actually, there's many more than 2, but we'll do 2 more now. So
I gotta go. Thank you very much. So I think your point is that having a small team with the autonomy is good, which in my view tends to lead to a teams having different technology stacks from each other, which may lead to, having a difficulty moving people around and such, especially the management doesn't like it. What's your view on having a different technical stacks within teams? Should we do something to merge them, at least in a technical level, or maybe in a team organization mind level? Or should we have a different things and let them not fight each other, but basically each team should have more say in what people use as technology?
It's interesting because the frame that I use now to think about these things is something, I think it's a little bit of a new thing. I wrote an article about this a couple of months ago called Active Knowledge. And the idea is that when we are managing systems in software companies, the people and the technology and stuff like this, we have to basically think not just of the people and the technology, but we have to think about different places in the organization and what the knowledge is that's there. And we know that knowledge dissipates over time, right? Just naturally, because people leave or they forget or things like this. We have to figure out what are the things that we care about in the domain, the technology, the ways of working and stuff like that, and make sure that we basically allow those things to persist. So in an organization where you have many technology stacks, some are going to be more important for your organization in the future. And it's good to maintain active knowledge by going and having people move from team to team and stuff like this. But there's an ecosystem to this. And the ecosystem is that you can have like some areas of like high standardization, which gives you efficiencies, or it's called economies of scale, right? But there's also other areas that are more like the frontier in a way, where you're trying new things to enter a new market and to basically exercise new technology. And that's not going to be everything. It's just going to be strategic areas within the system of focus. So like everything else, it's a balancing act. But I think this frame of active knowledge is valuable for this because it gets us to think about the things that people know in order to do the work that they do. A side note that I will mention, I forget the names of the people involved in knowledge management research, but I think from the 1960s or 1970s, there was a Japanese researcher. And he was actually using the word ba. It's like B-A.
The space.
Space, right. Using space in an abstract way. It is not just the room, but maybe the meeting, Zoom call, for instance, or things like this. But I think there's even more abstract than that. There's the spaces of areas of knowledge that persist in organizations if we nurture them. And I think that this framing is the thing that's valuable for us when we're making decisions in the context of a big system, the organization, the technology,
Right.
the existing code.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, last question.
オンライン側の質問です。3X についてです。プロダクトをどこまでもエキスパンドしたいと思う人もいると思います。どこがエクストラクトとの境界か見極める方法ありますか？
That's a wonderful question. And I think the thing that's interesting is basically the answer that nobody wants to hear, right? So I'm up here now because I have been involved in legacy code for a long period of time. Through accidents in my career, I wrote a book about this, right? And the interesting thing is to discover over the years how many organizations try to persist systems far longer than they should live, right? And quite often there's this thing that happens where you have something which is making money and you think, if I just add this little thing, this new feature, I'll be able to make more money. You can keep doing this, but at a certain point, you find that you have moved so far away from the original intent and the technology cannot be fixed or refactored quick enough to move into new areas. And this is so natural. This is like the lifetime of cities, the lifetime of people, the lifetime of animals, of plants. Basically, there is this thing where you can't have perpetual change and novelty without incurring a cost. And so some products are going to become so hard to change that people create new products as alternatives, or technology moves in a way where people shift from your product to somebody else's. And this is okay. And you need to be an organization where you have many sources of income, many products, so that when one is rising in value, it's great. When one starts to decline, there's other ways of going and finding new markets and things like this. So these are natural cycles that happen in anything that grows, right? And that's the thing about software, is it grows over time. And so the things that we have to do is we have to be aware of when we are pushing too far. And I think so many of us in this room have had this experience of somebody asks you for a feature and you're like, I can do that, but oh my God, it's going to basically go ahead and violate some of the ideas of what the system is in ways that will confuse people later and force even much more work. So there is this thing for products of knowing what the core thing is and how far you can go before it confuses people and slows down development. And we need to have far more awareness of this, knowing when we are trying to squeeze more value out of something and it's not the best thing to do. To me, that's the tipping point between expand and extract. The point at which you've reached maturity and you've decided there are certain avenues we will no longer go down. We will avoid certain new avenues in order to basically preserve the value for the market that we have and let it basically take its natural course. So I think that's the tipping point for this. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all these extra Q&A too. I think there's so many more out there, but that's what we're going to do in, as we talk in the hallway, as we have the networking party tonight, and then OST tomorrow. So thank you again for presentation. From here, we have a couple announcements. Yeah.